Thanks very much to the team at Executive Millwork for welcoming us to this great Alberta family-owned business that's been contributing to Alberta's economy for 35 years. Good to meet some folks who are in their apprenticeship program to become cabinet makers. A wonderful example of the businesses that invest in the talent of the future through apprenticeship programs. We're here today to make an important announcement about Alberta's ongoing efforts to ensure that we have the skilled and talented workforce that we need for a booming economy and for our long-term future. Alberta's government was elected over 3 years ago on a commitment to invest in skills for future jobs, to retool our education system, to focus on practical workplace skills that can set young Albertans up for a prosperous future and our economy up to meet the labour market demands of a dynamic and diversifying economy. We did so in part because I believe that a trade certificate has every bit as much value, merit, and worth as a university degree. And that apprenticeship learning, practical, experiential learning, like these apprentices here on this shop floor, is worth every bit as much as academic classroom learning. That's something we have to learn from many European countries that have long put much greater value and emphasis on apprenticeship learning and on the skilled trades in hundreds of different occupations. It's something that we're trying to do by retooling the funding formula in our post-secondary education system, and so much more. But let me say that Alberta is in an economic boom. We are leading Canada in economic growth and in job creation. Over 200,000 net new jobs have been created in our province since the start of last year. Unemployment is now below 5% for the first time in 7-8 years. And we have more people working in Alberta today than at any moment in our history. And now we are hearing more and more from employers like this that the biggest challenge they are facing is skill and labor shortages. Not enough people with the right skills for the jobs that are being created right now in our province. We also know that Alberta's economy is diversifying more quickly than perhaps ever in its history. While we're seeing renewed strength in our big oil and gas industry, we are seeing huge growth across the economy, from forestry to agriculture, from tourism to information technology, from digital startups to film and television, and to huge projects like the projects that may end up totaling upwards of $90 billion of capital investment in hydrogen, low-emitting petrochemical projects, carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects, all of which, to be built, are going to require skilled tradespeople with a background in experiential learning like apprenticeship programs. But we need people, and that's why Alberta launched the Alberta is Calling campaign. We're sending a clear message to our fellow Canadians down east and out west in Vancouver as well, that Alberta is calling with the highest incomes, the strongest economy, the lowest taxes, the lowest cost of living of any major population province, and the most affordable housing. An incredible value offering and the highest quality of life. Of course, The Economist magazine just ranked Calgary as having the highest standard of living and quality of life of any city in the Western Hemisphere, and the third highest in the world. I've been doing media interviews in Toronto and Vancouver over the past couple of weeks about our campaign. It's getting a lot of attention. And I'll actually be down in Toronto in a couple of weeks on an investment promotion trip, launching the next phase of the Alberta is Calling campaign. So we can bring talented young people from across the country to fuel our growth and address the pending labour shortages. It's also why we launched the Alberta Advantage Immigration Strategy, which is designed to give us a fast-moving provincial immigration program that attracts people with the skills that we need now and in the future, including 4 new streams of provincially selected immigrants. And of course, our Fairness for Newcomers Action Plan, designed to break down the barriers to credentialing for educated and trained newcomers, immigrants who've been stuck underemployed in our economy. All of that is part of our workforce strategy, but today we're taking another important step forward. The Alberta 2030 Building Skills for Jobs strategy outlines the vision and direction for Alberta's higher education system to develop a highly skilled and competitive workforce, to strengthen innovation and commercialization of research, and to forge stronger relationships between employers and our post-secondary institutions. We need to continue to increase access to post-secondary programs and create more opportunities for Albertans to reskill, to upskill, and to prepare them for success today and tomorrow. Earlier this summer, we announced an investment of $171 million over 3 years through the Alberta at Work initiative to create nearly 10,000 new spaces in high-demand programs across the post-secondary system. These additional spaces will support continued growth in key sectors of Alberta's economy, including tech, ag, financial services, aviation. Let me pause there to say a couple of very exciting announcements forthcoming in the next couple of weeks on aviation, and others. All areas that are seeing new and record-setting private sector investment pour into Alberta, partly as a result of the Alberta Recovery Plan. So we're seeing a real demand for new skilled workers emerge across our economy, and to respond to those needs, I am pleased to announce the fulfillment of another platform commitment with today's creation of the Premier's Council on Skills. This newly formed advisory board will be responsible for providing strategic advice to help government ensure that current and future post-secondary programming in Alberta is aligned with the needs of our high-demand sectors and strategic industries identified in Alberta's Recovery Plan. That's the plan that we launched in June of 2020 at the bottom of the COVID trough, because we knew that Alberta had been hit by the triple whammy, the pandemic, the global economic collapse, and the collapse of energy prices, and we needed to get ahead of the ball. We needed to skate to where the puck was going, and that's why we launched that strategy to diversify. This task force, the Premier's Skills Task Force, will bridge the gap between industry, government, and education institutions, including at least one member from industries in each of the following areas: ag and forestry, tourism, construction, of course the energy sector, technology, aviation, aerospace and logistics, finance and fintech, that's financial technology, and the health industry, because obviously we have strategies to address the current and pending shortage of healthcare workers. The Council will advise on skills development and will provide valuable input from these key industries to make sure that we're giving our students the tools that they need to succeed. Now, the members of the Council have demonstrated achievement and excellence in their fields and have the knowledge, competency, and skill in industry that will help provide valuable insight to our post-secondary institutions and to prepare students for the challenges of the future. The task force will work with Alberta's government and stakeholders like the Alberta Board of Skilled Trades and the Minister's Advisory Council on Higher Education and Skills to give us the practical on-the-ground advice that we need. It's vital that we keep pace with the needs of our economy as it continues to grow and diversify to secure a future generation of prosperity. We must look ahead to the Alberta of the future and ensure that graduates enter the workforce with the training and skills that are relevant. And with that, I'm going to invite Minister of Advanced Education, Demetrios Nicolaides, to offer some additional comments.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Premier, and thank you to everyone who's joining us here today. And of course, a special thanks and recognition to the folks here at Executive Millwork for hosting us in the incredible facility we're in today. Before I get started, I want to recognize and thank all of the incredible industry leaders who will be serving on the Premier's Council on Skills. I won't mention each and every one of them by name, but want to acknowledge specifically the Chair, Dennis Perrin, with the Alberta and Prairies Director with the Christian Labour Association of Canada, as well as Vice Chair, Dr. Glenn Feltham, who has a history with post-secondary involvement, more recently with the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, as well as Gurpreet Lal, with the President and Chief Executive Officer with the Petroleum Services Association of Canada, as well as Darren Reeder, President and Chief Executive Officer with the Tourism Industry Association, and Dr. Tom Snell, President of Columbia College and the Chair of the Board of Directors of Columbia College. Thank you to Dr. Snell and Darren Reeder and others who are here in attendance this morning. Of course, as the Premier noted, the importance of skilled trades and apprenticeship education cannot be overlooked. Alberta continues to see incredible growth and success across all sectors of our economy. And as the Premier mentioned, in fact, we are leading the country in GDP growth. In fact, our economy is returning to levels not seen since 2014. But such economic success does not come without its own challenges. And one of those challenges is a shortage of skilled talent. Businesses and regional leaders need to have confidence that workforce needs will be met. And as well, employers are concerned that they won't be able to hire the staff that they need. That's why we created the Alberta 2030 Building Skills for Jobs strategy, the first long-term plan for post-secondary education in over a decade. We need to equip Albertans with the skills and knowledge they need to succeed and to secure Alberta's future. The Premier, of course, touched on one of our key investments from Budget 2022, being the $171 million investment over 3 years to create 10,000 additional spaces in high-demand programs at our post-secondary institutions. Budget 2022 also invests $30 million to expand apprenticeship education in Alberta. This follows years of investments from our government into the trades. In 2019, we invested $20 million into the Skills for Jobs plan to expand scholarships, expand on-the-job experience, and youth outreach programs in the trades. We also increased support to careers, next generation, and women building futures. Alberta's government is focused on strengthening the skills needs of our province and ensuring that every young Albertan has the skills and competencies that they need to succeed. And one of the recommendations from the apprenticeship task force that we convened in 2019 was to establish the Premier's Council on Skills. The Council will help government ensure that students are learning the skills and knowledge that tomorrow's labour market demands. As mentioned by the Premier, the Council is accountable to the Premier through the Minister of Advanced Education and will be advisory in nature. And like other councils, they'll have a number of specific tasks, responsibilities, and guiding principles to aid them in providing the best advice possible to government. First and foremost, the Council will provide input on the challenges, opportunities, and changing needs of Alberta's workforce. This advice will help government better align post-secondary programming with the current and future skilled demands of industry. Secondly, the Council will also engage with various stakeholders, including other agencies, boards, commissions, who are also working on issues related to skill development and education. This will include the Minister's Advisory Council on Higher Education, the Alberta Board of Skilled Trades, and the Career Education Task Force. And lastly, of course, the Council will work to provide an annual report outlining the prior year's activities and guidance. The Premier's Council on Skills will be guided by the vision of the Alberta 2030 strategy, which again is to ensure that post-secondary education in Alberta is providing Albertans with the skills, knowledge, and competencies they need to meet the needs of tomorrow. I'd like to thank the Council members for agreeing to take on this important challenge. I know their knowledge and expertise will be invaluable to our economy and to future young Albertans. So in closing, I would now like to invite Dr. Tom Snell, President of Columbia College, to offer a few remarks. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Tom Snell. I must say that it is a distinct honor to be here today. I am proud to join the Premier Kenney and Minister Nicolaides to talk about the vital importance of the new Premier's Council on Skills. It's critical for each Albertan to continue to develop their knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors. This will ensure that they have a more successful career. In turn, this will help their employer to be more competitive, their job more secure, and this province more prosperous. The introduction this April by Minister Nicolaides, the Alberta 2030 Building Skills for Jobs, introduced an exciting new vision and direction for Alberta's higher education institutions. This is a new approach to higher education that will challenge us to move from being good providers of higher education to being great providers of higher education. It will challenge us to be more innovative and creative in developing more relevant industry-focused education. As the founder and president of Columbia College Calgary, I'm proud to lead a group of highly dedicated professional faculty and staff that have worked closely with industry for decades. This has enabled Columbia to achieve, in North America, amongst the highest employer satisfaction rates of students in their final practicum, the highest student graduation rates, and the highest student employment rates in their field of education. It is clearly an understatement to say that I am most excited to be part of this new council. This is the first Minister of Advanced Education and Premier that I have met in the last 45 years as a businessman and educator that are not just talking about, but are actually making fundamental changes to higher education. This includes establishing this industry-based council with a mandate to increase the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors of graduates. As a key link between industry and government, this council will bridge into the divide between higher education and the essential skills needed by industry as a whole, as well as the changing technical needs of various current and new industries. I look forward in working with my fellow council members in providing advice to the Premier through Minister Nicolaides. This council will help ensure government, industry, and Alberta's higher education system are more able to work together to strengthen Alberta's competitiveness in the world economy. Not only will this council benefit students who are studying and preparing for an exciting new career, but it will also benefit employers looking for new employees with the right set of knowledge and skills needed in both today's and tomorrow's workplace. I'm looking forward to getting started on this vital, important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Premier Minister Nicolaides and Dr. Snell. That concludes today's formal portion of the press conference. Just some housekeeping rules before we move over to the media Q&A. There is a microphone at the back of the room. Please state your name as well as your outlet before speaking, as well as who you're going to ask the question to. As I only see two journalists in line here in the room, we're going to start on the phones first. Operator, can you please put through our first question of the day?
Thank you. Kelly Kreiderman, Globe and Mail.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. Premier, I'm just wondering if you have spoken to the federal government regarding energy concerns in Europe and any role that Canada could play in terms of helping European countries in what we know is going to be an energy crisis, or already is an energy crisis.
Thank you for the important question, Kelly. Before I respond, I should just offer words of condolences to our friends in Saskatchewan on the terrible violence that happened this weekend. The unthinkable violence. I grew up in a small Saskatchewan community, and I can't even imagine how devastating and traumatizing this must be for all of those affected. And I just want to encourage anybody with information on the crimes to report those immediately to the police so that the surviving perpetrator can be brought to justice. I reached out to Premier Moe to offer any assistance that the Government of Alberta could provide. On your question, Kelly, no, we have not had much in the way of direct communication with the Government of Canada on that. I would say that in the spring, we did have some very initial high-level discussions. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland had reached out to us to discuss ways that we might collaborate on getting Canadian energy to European markets to help them in the crisis they're facing. That has been accelerated by Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine. I was very disappointed in the Prime Minister's lack of ambition and vision in response to the urgent request from German Chancellor Scholz to increase Canadian energy exports to the Atlantic market. It was basically a shrug of the shoulders that we got from the Prime Minister. I don't think he, perhaps some Canadians, don't understand the depths of the crisis that Europe is facing. We may be witnessing people in Europe dying from cold, unable to heat their homes this winter. We are certainly about to witness widespread economic devastation in Europe. And all of this will help Vladimir Putin in his cynical game to leverage his dominance of European energy markets to pressure European governments to go soft in their solidarity with Ukraine. So if Canada's solidarity with Ukraine is more than just words, then, as I have been saying since February, the single biggest thing that Canada could do strategically is to get more of our energy out to those markets. Look, this is a country, Canada, that managed almost overnight to build one of the largest navies in the world in the Second World War to supply Europe with critical material during the war that saved Britain and ultimately Europe. That's the scale of ambition that I think is required here. If we could do that between 1939 and 1945, why can't we decide to make at least one major East Coast LNG project a matter of national urgency? We are here ready, willing, and able to provide the energy. We have the world's best and North America's biggest pipeline companies located right here with the greatest expertise. I have no doubt that the capital markets would be there to support this. In fact, I work directly to connect Berkshire Hathaway to Energy Saguenay with a prospective $5 billion equity investment in that project, but that investment was ultimately cancelled because of the political uncertainty that Prime Minister Trudeau's government has helped to create on these issues. So capital markets are there, the expertise is there, the East Coast governments are there, the European governments are desperate for this energy. All it requires is some federal leadership. And sadly, there's a total lack of that.
Thank you, Premier. Kelly, do you have a follow-up today?
I do, thank you. We have heard from leadership candidate Danielle Smith last week that it is unprecedented and entirely inappropriate for a premier like yourself to be commenting on some of the ideas being put forward in the leadership race, and that you are trying to tip the scales in favor of your preferred candidate, Travis Toews. And I was wondering if you have a reaction to what she's saying.
Well, it's completely with precedent for a premier to articulate and defend government policy. The government I lead was elected on a platform to build a strong Alberta in a united Canada, to create jobs, the economy, and get pipelines built, and to respect the rule of law. The so-called Sovereignty Act would effectively take us to the brink of separation from the Canadian Federation, would shred the rule of law, and would do devastating damage to jobs, the economy, and the prospect of pipelines. This is a cockamamie idea that was first floated by a far-right special interest group a year ago. I was asked to comment on it last fall through the winter in public forums, on telephone town halls, local town halls that I attended across the province over the past year, and I'm simply restating the position I articulated then. I'm not engaging in the leadership election. I'm not endorsing or opposing a particular candidate. I am maintaining the consistent position of the democratically elected government, which is to defend a strong Alberta in a united Canada, the rule of law, and to defend Alberta's economy. So, there are other candidates who have taken positions, I understand, at variance with government policy. That's fine. That's their prerogative. It's all in the nature of a leadership debate or election. I think there's one or two candidates who have expressed opposition about, for example, the idea of creating an Alberta provincial police force or an Alberta provincial pension plan. But the policy of the elected government is to support those concepts in principle and to work through the details on their viability. So there may be candidates who disagree with government on that. That's their prerogative, but it's my responsibility to articulate and defend government policy. Similarly, I think there's one, maybe more candidates who have expressed opposition to aspects of the government's plans around curriculum reform. But we have a clear democratic mandate to pursue that reform, and I will continue to advocate for the positive reforms we're doing to improve learning outcomes in Alberta through Minister Lagrange's reforms. So I'm not suddenly going to go silent on government policy. I mean, if we had a leadership candidate who wanted higher taxes or a sales tax, I wouldn't change my position in opposition to higher taxes or a sales tax, for example. So I'm just maintaining the consistent and long-standing public positions of the government. As I say, this is an idea that was proposed a year ago. But let me say that I've been active as a leader in the Conservative movement for 30 years in this country, in elected office for 25 of those years. And I have always been consistent in my belief that the rule of law is a fundamental Conservative principle. The so-called Alberta Sovereignty Act is a full frontal attack on the rule of law. And while sharing the frustration of most Albertans about how we're treated by Ottawa, by the Trudeau government, I have always been unapologetically a Canadian patriot. I'm not about to become spineless on my patriotism or my support for the rule of law because somebody in a leadership campaign disagrees. And let me say this. This is a law, and I'm going to quote from the proposal that was made a year ago, on which I have been commenting for a year. The Alberta Sovereignty Act would provide Alberta's legislature with the authority to refuse enforcement of any specific federal court ruling that Alberta's elected body deemed to be federal intrusion. So this is an idea to shred the rule of law, the authority of the courts. I am here on this shop floor taking another step forward on our economic recovery strategy as we have attracted $150 billion of investment to Alberta in the past 2 years, created over 200,000 jobs, brought unemployment to its lowest level in over 7 years, leading the country in economic and job growth, in population growth, all of which would be jeopardized if Alberta decides to become a banana republic that refuses to respect the authority of the courts, of the Constitution, and suddenly decides to move in the direction of separation from the Canadian Federation. So no, I'm not going to be silent about proposals like that. I just came back from Korea, talking to some of the largest companies in Asia about multi-billion-dollar investments in Alberta. I can tell you that those investors The Alberta Sovereignty Act would be like kryptonite for them. They're interested in political stability, not political chaos. They're interested in a jurisdiction that respects the rule of law and the authority of the courts, not one that thumbs its nose, Banana Republic style, at those foundational principles. So I have a responsibility to Albertans. I was elected as Premier with the largest mandate in Alberta electoral history, over 1 million votes, to create jobs, grow the economy, and get pipelines built. On pipelines, by the way, I'm the guy who branded the Federal Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-69, as the No More Pipelines Act. Well, if the proposed Alberta Sovereignty Act becomes law, it's the new No More Pipelines law. Because if Alberta, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If Alberta can ignore federal court rulings and federal jurisdiction, clearly articulated in the Constitution, then so can British Columbia. British Columbia right now is complying with federal jurisdiction and a federal court order striking down their efforts to block the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which is existential for Alberta jobs and our economic future. If Alberta validates, if Alberta comes out with an act like this and says, hey, any province can at whim ignore the Supreme Court of Canada, the Constitution, well, guess what? BC can say, we ignore federal authority over interprovincial pipelines and infrastructure. We ignore the ruling of the Supreme Court of Canada. We're going to stand in the way, not only of the Trans Mountain expansion, but perhaps the Coastal GasLink LNG Canada project. So no, I have been consistent in my patriotism, my belief in national unity. Through 25 years of public service, and in the last election, I have been consistent in my defense of Alberta's economy and in my pursuit, our government's pursuit of pipelines, and I'm not going to simply become spineless and silent about a proposal made a year ago which attacks all of those things.
Thank you, Premier. Operator, can you please put through our second question?
Thank you, Dan Grummett, Global News.
Dan, you might be on mute. Dan?
Dan, your line is open. Please go ahead. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
I think you've kind of answered some of my question there, but I guess specifically I'll ask you about the detailed outline for this proposed Sovereignty Act was released today. I know you're not going to comment on that specifically, but in your mind, is there any detailed outline or overview that could convince you otherwise that this is somehow constitutional?
Well, I don't know what you're talking about today. I am looking at a detailed outline that was published for the Sovereignty Act by a far-right special interest group a year ago. That's the one I've been commenting on now for a year. It was published by that organization. I just quoted from it a moment ago. It says, amongst other things, that the Alberta Sovereignty Act would provide Alberta's legislature with the authority to refuse enforcement of any specific federal court ruling. So the Alberta legislature could just, by whim, ignore the rulings of the Supreme Court of Canada. It says it black on white. It's been out there for a year. That's what we're talking about here. That is Banana Republic. That's not the rule of law. And you cannot have a functioning economy. You cannot attract investment with a government that is committed to ignoring the authority of the courts. Period, full stop. This is what I've been saying for a year and what I'll continue to say.
Thanks, Premier. Dan, did you have anything else, or did that catch your questions?
I'll just ask about the attacks in Saskatchewan. I know you've offered assistance. Is there anything else, the government is working on, maybe starting some sort of central fundraising initiative, or what specifically do you think Alberta could do to help in this scenario?
Well, made a general offer to my friend Scott Moe for any assistance. He hasn't indicated any particular needs, but we stand ready. Certainly, RCMP division, I know we'll be in close contact with the RCMP branch in Saskatchewan to offer additional personnel as needed. So should they need additional policing services, investigative services, things of that nature, I know that our Solicitor General and the Commander of K Division are ready and willing to provide that assistance. In terms of fundraising for the victims, I would just encourage people, I think there are a number of GoFundMe and other online fundraising efforts that have been set up, and I think that's probably the best way, is just for people to go directly to the folks who are in need of that support that have been set up from the affected communities.
Okay, thanks, Premier. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Michelle Bellefontaine, CBC.
Oh, hi there, Premier. I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the Sovereignty Act. I know you've are speaking quite strongly about it this morning. I just wondered if you could just talk a little bit more about Smith in the release that she sent out today.
So, Michelle, could you just come back one sentence? The audio is not perfect here. I just missed part of what you said.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Thank you. I wanted to ask you some more about the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And I want to touch a little bit on the idea that she's leaving the door open to not respect a court decision deeming an Alberta special motion, as she calls it, unconstitutional. So what do you think about her not guaranteeing that she'll respect the rule of law?
Okay, so Michelle, I have not, and I will not comment on the statements made by leadership candidates. I'm not getting involved in the leadership campaign. I am repeating my assessment of the catastrophically stupid Sovereignty Act that was proposed by this right-wing special interest group over a year ago. And I don't know what, frankly, I'm not following closely what individual leadership candidates are saying, believe it or not. I've kind of got a busy full-time job. But part of that job is to defend the democratic mandate of this government. Let me remind you that when we created the United Conservative Party in the summer of 2017, that 95% of the members of both of our legacy parties endorsed the merger agreement, which included the following words, which for me were a deal breaker. I didn't put down many insistent demands in the negotiations on the merger agreement, but one that I did put down was the following, that the United Conservative Party is committed to a strong Alberta in a united Canada. A strong Alberta in a united Canada, quote unquote. 95% of our grassroots members endorsed that language. And I went to the people of Alberta in the spring of 2019 with that commitment to lead a government that would build a stronger Alberta in a united Canada. And so I make no apologies for speaking out against a cockamamie idea that is, according to its own authors, a step towards separation. If you think we've had economic challenges in the past, wait till you see a landlocked Alberta that has no use of the federal power to get interprovincial infrastructure like pipelines built. Wait till BC gets the idea that they can play the same game, to block our pipelines. So that is what I am commenting on. I have a democratic mandate and responsibility to do that. That's the burden of leadership.
Thanks, Premier. Michelle, did you have a follow-up today?
Yeah, so just to be clear, you're making a distinction between what Daniel Smith is saying and this other group. Is it Free Alberta that you're referring to?
I have not and will not comment on statements made by leadership candidates. I was asked during the Saturday morning radio show I do about a month ago, a caller called in, I think by text, and asked what I thought about the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And I restated the position I've been articulating for about a year. This is the proposal that was made about a year ago. And it's not for me to comment on what twists and turns or permutations different candidates may be taking. It is my responsibility to articulate the policy of the government of Alberta and defend Alberta's interests. That includes the rule of law. That includes a strong Alberta in the Canadian Federation. That includes building, not destroying investor confidence. That includes getting pipelines done and not empowering other provinces to block them by ignoring federal power.
Thanks, Premier. I do see we have one more caller on the line. That's Radio Canada. I do promise we'll come and give you the last word of the day, Audrey, but for now we'll give the opportunity to the first question from the floor.
Good morning, or it's actually good afternoon, Premier. You've had some very strong words in the past and today on the Alberta Sovereignty Act. I think you've also said that following October 6th, at least for a period of time, you will remain as a member of the Legislative Assembly for Calgary-Lougheed, and also obviously a member of the United Conservative Party caucus. The first order of business, according to one of the leadership candidates, is their Bill 1 is the Alberta Sovereignty Act. What will you do in that case when it comes to having to vote yay or nay on Bill number 1 of the government if that comes to pass?
Well, if the Alberta is so-called, in that hypothetical scenario, I don't care who introduces it, could be a private member's bill, I don't care where it comes from. If somebody were to introduce the bill that the idea that I have been critiquing for much of the past year, I would undoubtedly vote against it, because I have a democratic responsibility to my constituents to maintain my consistent support for a strong Alberta in a united Canada, to respect the rule of law, including the authority of the courts, and to defend investor confidence for a strong Alberta economy. So I could not, in conscience, vote for a bill that would shred the rule of law, ignore the authority of the courts, massively destabilize investor confidence, jeopardize the construction of pipelines, and take us a huge step towards separating from Canada.
And my supplementary, Premier, is if you were to come to that point where you, in good conscience, had to vote against the Sovereignty Act, it would probably come before caucus, as you well know, would you attempt to encourage Albertans as a whole to go to the government, to lobby the government to drop that plan? Would you go to your fellow UCP MLAs and say, I'm voting against it, maybe you should think about voting against it? This could be a very, very interesting post-October 6th if they proceed with the Sovereignty Act. So I'm just wondering what you would do. Would you, in caucus, speak up and say, I think it's a bad idea, I think some of the rest of you should vote against it, etc.?
Look, I'm not going to go through a bunch of different hypothetical scenarios, but I will tell you that in my 3 decades as a leader of the Canadian Conservative movement, in my 25 years of elected public service, in my 5 years of leadership of this party, I have always been rock solid, consistent in my patriotic support of a strong Alberta in a united Canada, in my conservative conviction that the rule of law is a basic building block of our society, and in my support for a strong Alberta economy that would get wrecked by what some have called the Alberta Anarchy Act. One conservative legal scholar that you know well has referred to it as the Alberta Suicide Act. You might also call it the No More Pipelines Act 2.0. So I'm not shy about opposing these risky, dangerous, half-baked ideas, and nor will I be in the future.
Okay, thank you, Premier. I see one more question from the floor before returning to the phone.
I can't see you from over there.
Hello.
Hey, I just wanted to follow up on what you said, your remarks about Saskatchewan, and sort of look at the people. As you mentioned, you grew up in Saskatchewan. It's pretty tough in this province to find somebody who didn't, or at least doesn't have family members there. Are there any things in terms of what the government can do to support our people in terms of, will we put up a book of condolences? Will there be memorial sites? Those kinds of things so that people here can go and pay their respects.
That's a good idea. And so we did lower our flags to half-mast in provincial buildings this weekend. And I think that's a good idea, that we should allow people in MLA's offices and the legislature, McDougall Centre, to sign a book of condolences. And I hope that when the legislature reconvenes, there will be an opportunity for a collective moment of prayerful regret. And we should think of other ways of doing that. I'll reach out. I mean, I'm trying not to bother Premier Moe because he's got these urgent issues on his plate right now, but I will certainly see if they're proposing a day of mourning and whether perhaps Alberta could participate in that, because the connections between Alberta and Saskatchewan could not be closer. You're quite right.
Can I have one more quick
Yes,
question?
go
This
ahead.
one's actually about the council.
Wow, thank you. On topic. I made a bet with Dimitri. There wouldn't be a question on topic, but there is. Go ahead.
All right. Do I get a prize for this? Just when we were talking about the council and about how, you know, it's designed to set up industry and workers with success for young people who are coming out of school in the next couple of years, where do we see those gaps? Where should they be focusing their energy in terms of opportunities in this province?
I'll take a first stab and then let Dimitri fill in. You know, part of the challenge is we're facing the silver tsunami. The demographic time bomb is going off right now. The boomers are starting to retire. And one troubling thing we have found post-COVID in the recovery is a lot of older workers, 55 and over. By the way, I'm 54, so I'm pretty much in that category, are not coming back into the workforce. And for whatever reason, they've just, a lot of those folks have checked out. So there's a much lower labor force participation rate amongst the oldest group of workers. And there was a spell when people broadly were not going into the skilled trades. So we've done better in recent years, but there is a big gap of skilled trades workers in industrial trades, for example, that we are about to hit in a hard way. And that really concerns me. So that's why we're trying to retool the education system, because let me be blunt. One of the great things about position I'm in now is I can say things that I might not otherwise get away with. But, you know, there's no waiting list to get into sociology or international grievance studies at one of our universities. Big public subsidies for those kinds of programs with modest employment outcomes, with very poor employment outcomes. But often during boom times, we have huge, I remember during the last boom, there's a 3-year wait list to get into SAIT or NAIT as a pipe fitter and as a welder to do the block training for the apprenticeship programs. So how dumb is that? That we would be massively subsidizing programs with very little labor market demand, but creating big backlogs in programs for trades with huge labor market demands. So that's why we've been changing the funding model in Department of Higher Education, Advanced Education, to get a much better alignment with where the labor market demands are. Dimitri?
Sure, thank you, Premier, and thank you for the question. As the Premier noted, I'm now the recipient of winning a friendly bet. But you know, to your point, I think specifically as you mentioned, where young people should look and how they might look to the future. Well, first and foremost, I would say that the future of our province is incredibly bright. There's tremendous opportunity, as I think both the Premier and I noted. The economy is moving forward. We're seeing significant new investment coming back to the province. And I think that there's tremendous opportunity. And I think for a lot of young individuals trying to chart their path, I think it's beneficial and helpful to look at areas where, as the Premier mentioned, there are shortages. Where is there high demand? Because, of course, that individual can be almost guaranteed a high degree of success after they complete their studies or their educational program, whether that's in the trades where we have significant demand for new learners, whether that's in healthcare, whether that's in engineering, film and television. There are a number of areas, and that's why, as well as I mentioned earlier, we've recently invested $171 million to create 10,000 additional spaces. I should note it's the largest targeted expansion of seats in Alberta history, in key programs where we are seeing a high demand. So I think for young people, the message I would send is there's a lot of great opportunity. Look at some of those areas and occupations where there's high demand for new people, and I'm confident they'll be met with significant success.
One of those, I don't want people getting the impression it's all industrial trades, because one of those areas that we're investing to get the colleges and universities to educate more people is nurses and healthcare aides. Clearly, we learned in COVID, not just here but across Canada, we need more nurses, and so how many do you recall the number? But we've significantly expanded the number of seats in our PSIs for nurses. Thank you.
Okay, and just before I hop back over to the phones, Jason, you showed up in person today. I just want to make sure you don't have a question. Perfect. Okay, operator, can you please put through our last question of the day?
Thank you. Audrey Neveau, Radio Canada.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'll ask my first in English, but if you could answer in French too, that'd be appreciated. Premier, you were quite passionate in your defense of the rule of law when we were talking about the Alberta Sovereignty Act earlier. Do you feel like just the discussion around this and the consequences it could have is unraveling everything you've worked for in your political career?
Yes. Oui.
Okay, and your follow-up, Audrey?
Could you expand on that? Could you expand on that?
In English and then French. I think I've said it. Look, you can't be a conservative if you don't believe in the rule of law. You can't be a Democrat if you don't believe in the rule of law, small d Democrat. A government that pretends it can, at will, set aside any court decision, ignore the Constitution, is deciding to deliberately undermine the rule of law. I mean, the last time we saw something like this, I think the only other time in Canadian history was in 1937, when Bible Bill Aberhart passed a law saying that people could not challenge the constitutionality of a law in the Canadian courts unless the provincial cabinet granted them authority, which is why the lieutenant governor withheld royal assent and created a constitutional crisis. Why in the world would we want, as a province in 2022, when everything's going right for Alberta right now, our economy has come back full steam, huge new investment pouring into our province, people moving here, why would we want to go back to a 1937 style constitutional crisis? That's not what I'm hearing from Albertans. I think Albertans want a stronger province. They're damn right to want that. I do too. But that requires hard work. Not just throwing out half-baked, explosive ideas. Hard work, like this government has done, to get control over the regulation of industrial emissions, get control over the regulation of methane emissions, get control over the regulation of northern wildlife habitat, to get the federal government to lift the cap on the fiscal stabilization program worth hundreds of millions of dollars to Alberta, to get all 10 provinces to support us in that quest, to get $1 billion out of Ottawa at the height of the COVID crisis to employ blue-collar Albertans in oil field well reclamation and completion, to get continued progress on the federally owned Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, to get a referendum in Alberta on equalization reform, to hold Senate elections, to do the hard, detailed groundwork for a potential Alberta police force, an Alberta pension plan, to create an Alberta provincial firearms chief officer, to create an Alberta provincial parole board, and so much more. We have done more than any government since Premier Brownlee got the Natural Resource Transfer Agreement to build a stronger and more autonomous Alberta in the Canadian Federation. But I think all of the economic progress that we have made could be put at risk by proposing taking a huge step towards separation, the banana republic denial of the authority of the courts, undermining confidence in the rule of law, and consequently driving away investment and people. We are advertising in BC and Ontario right now for people to come and join us. Alberta's calling. I'm going to go down to Toronto in a couple of weeks to promote that and promote investment. We are this close, I can tell you. I've been working for over 3 years on landing some major financial services jobs, like thousands of them in Alberta, to drive our diversification from Canadian banks and financial institutions. Do you think that's going to happen if the government of Alberta says the authority of the courts don't have any weight in Alberta? Not a chance. So yeah, that's why I'm speaking out on this, because I think it's contrary to our vital economic interests. It's contrary to conservative principles, and it's contrary to at least the mandate that I was elected with. I'll try to say that more briefly in French. Oui, je crois qu'avec toutes les choses qui vont bien pour l'Alberta, la croissance économique, la création d'emplois, la diversification, énormément d'investissements et tout ça, avec tous nos efforts à renforcer un Alberta fort au sein de la Fédération canadienne, je m'inquiète d'un propos farfelu de s'attaquer à nos meilleurs intérêts économiques, au principe de primauté du droit, qui est un principe conservatrice essentiel, et de s'attaquer de la Fédération canadienne. C'est très sérieux. Et je souligne que ce n'est pas un commentaire sur la campagne d'un candidat à la chefferie de mon parti. C'est un commentaire que j'ai fait publiquement en ce qui concerne ce propos pour la loi sur la souveraineté qui a été proposée par un organisme il y a 1 an. Un organisme qui a dit que le gouvernement de l'Alberta puisse ignorer n'importe quelle décision des cours. Ce n'est pas dans mes intérêts. Et je vais continuer à défendre le mandat démocratique sur lequel j'ai été élu par plus d'1 million Albertains. Ça fait 3 ans. Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks. That concludes today's Media Avail.